Is AI helping or hurting your preparation for the executive assessment, the GMAT, or whatever standardized test you are preparing for? My answer may surprise you. Hi, I'm Brett Etheridge, founder of Dominate Test Prep, and I've been teaching standardized tests for over 20 years. I've worked with tens of thousands of students from all over the world, and I will be the first to admit that AI has been a wonderful tool for my students because you now have access to an incredible amount of help and information that didn't previously exist. I've seen how students have used AI in conjunction with my courses, even in my tutoring. I had a student come to me recently with a very detailed study plan that AI helped him generate, and it was surprisingly good. He did end up, however, hiring me as a tutor for various reasons that we're going to get into here. So I want to get very specific about 3 ways that AI may be harming you if you are overly relying on it. There are certain things that AI doesn't do well when it comes specifically to test preparation, and frankly, some ways that it may be leading you astray. So this video is going to get very practical. It's a little bit cautionary. I just want you to understand how to use AI and how not to use or rely on AI to set yourself up for maximum success on test day. So with that, let's dive in. Get ready to take some notes. We're going to get very specific. 3 key ways that AI may be harming your preparation for your standardized test. Threat number 1 is this. AI, as you may have realized, is more interested oftentimes in appearing to be right than actually being right. And that's unfortunately very true when you come to AI for help with your standardized test. Here's a very specific example. So this is a query I ran with this prompt, this question. And it seems like a very simple and straightforward question. What are the most commonly tested math concepts on the EA, the executive assessment? And by the way, I ran a similar prompt for the GMAT, the GRE, and ran into the same sticking point. So if you're not taking the EA, just bear with me and sort of filter this through whichever standardized test you are taking. But here's the reality. This would be important information for you to know, wouldn't it? If you're going to craft your own study plan, if you're trying to figure out where to prioritize your time, where should you focus your efforts? What are the most commonly tested math concepts? Now, here's what I know. I know what the answer to this question is. As I said, I've been teaching these tests for a long time. I have built an entire boot camp class around this question. Like, what are the high yield math concepts? And this is the answer. I went through hundreds, if not thousands, of official EA and GMAT practice questions. Every one of the questions from the official guides, the official online questions that the GMAT sells, all of their practice tests, and literally categorized every one of those questions into what are the topics that it tests. And I did it for both math, quant, and verbal. And on the math side, here is the answer. Here's what I came up with. And you see the pie chart here. The biggest pie chart is the maroon. The piece of the pie is the maroon there. Fractions, ratios, percents, to a little bit lesser degree, algebra word problems, and all the way around to that other category. So this for sure is what we know is the answer to the question. Here was AI's answer, and I think you're going to find it pretty insightful, especially in one key, important, glaring way. Number 1, arithmetic and number properties. This is what they said. Hey, this is one of the biggest buckets. True. Good job, AI. Pat yourself on the back. You got most of this right. Fractions, decimals, and percents. I agree. Converting among fractions, decimals, and percents. I agree. Ratios and proportions. I agree. Positive and negative numbers, yeah. Divisibility rules, factors and multiples, not as much on the executive assessment as it is on the GMAT. Prime numbers can appear. Greatest common factor, not necessarily as much on the EA, a little bit more on the GMAT. So again, this is sort of, somebody who knows the test would be able to find some shades of nuances here, but for the most part, pretty good job, AI, on the biggest bucket. Number 2, algebra. Yeah, of course, algebra is on there. What it's not saying is certainly the approach I take when I tutor and when in my courses is that I help you avoid algebra in a lot of cases. All these algebra word problems, they're non-standard strategies and techniques and ways of getting right answers without always doing the traditional algebra. But to be sure, algebra is tested on the EA. Word problems, for sure, it comes back to the same thing I just said, though. You don't always have to set up an equation and solve them the traditional way. But nevertheless, AI isn't wrong in terms of the types of word problems that could appear and so forth. Here's where it starts to go sideways a little bit, though, right? It says data interpretation is a big math concept. Yes, kind of. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't sort of differentiate for you and explain that the data interpretation, the reading, the tables, the charts, the line graphs is actually its own section. It's called integrated reasoning on the executive assessment. It's part of data insights on the GMAT. And so, yes, technically it's a skill. AI isn't wrong, but it sort of makes it seem like it's just another thing you have to do. Reading charts and tables, you do, but in the context of an entirely different question type. Nevertheless, okay, grant you that. Statistics, yes, it's right there in the big green pie. Here's the problem though. Look what it says is another big category. Geometry. Geometry basics. Lines and angles, triangles, quadrilaterals, circles, area, volume. Eh, it's not tested on the executive assessment. It's just not. It never has been part of the executive assessment. It used to be part of the GMAT. Look at the next question I ran. I said, wait a second, are these same concepts tested on the GMAT or are there differences? And it says, yes, there's substantial overlap. That's true. There is substantial overlap between the EA and the GMAT. The differences in the scope and how hard. I agree. But then you look down at the big picture. Here's what's the same. And then if you look down here, I don't have it circled, but towards the bottom, geometry, some geometry. No. Geometry used to be on the GMAT. The GMAT got rid of geometry. And so if you're relying on EA to help you figure out what to study, you might waste a ton of time preparing for major topics that aren't even on the exam. Again, AI wants to appear right more than it wants to be right. This brings us to threat number 2. And this gets very practical, right? So from a topic standpoint, okay, fine, you maybe go to the official website and just double check, cross-reference it. But what about how to actually solve questions? Threat number 2 is that AI doesn't always show you the best way to solve questions or the most efficient way to answer a question. And I understand and acknowledge that this is what students are doing a lot these days. Hey, do I need to hire a tutor? Do I need to take a class? Can I just type this question I'm struggling with into AI and have it explain how to solve the question? Of course you can. But the question I would have for you is, are you sure it's telling you the best way? And is it setting you up to get other similar questions right? Are you learning underlying principles that will apply to variations of said question? What if that math concept is tested one way on problem solving, but a different way on data sufficiency, for example, or integrated reasoning? And so an over-reliance on just saying, hey, AI, how do I solve this problem? Like, yeah, you can learn some stuff for sure. You can see where you got stuck on a particular question for sure. But what about broader applications? And what about efficiency and getting right answers, sometimes, as I suggested, in non-traditional ways? But I'll give you a perfect example, right? This isn't an example of a question where a non-traditional or what I call a non-standard approach would help you avoid the algebra, for example. But this is from the official EA practice questions. And you, if you want, you can go ahead and press pause, give it a try on your own. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and I'm going to solve it for you in 2 ways. The first way I'm going to solve it is the way that AI told me to solve it. Like if you had run this question through AI, I'll show you the way they would say to solve it. And then I'm going to show you Brett's way to solve it and why it's important and what you might be missing. So go ahead and press pause, give it a try, see how you do, and then let me show you a few things about this question. All right, so how did you do? Well, let me start with AI's solution, and it's a very traditional solution. It's the way your high school math teacher would have taught you to do it, or maybe even your middle school math teacher would have taught you to do it. It's a lot of manipulating fractions the traditional way, which is one of those big categories, right? And so here's what it says. Okay, we have this monthly meeting and 2/5 of the attendees were male. So male equals 2/5. Okay, and then on you, you would have to recognize, and this is what I always would teach my students, is immediately find the counter to that. So if it's told you male, that means 3/5 are female. Okay, so a lot of students might miss that step, but I just always like to do everything with whatever information they have given me. And then it says, okay, of the attendees, 7/8 of the males. So here's the tip-off words, and this is going to be important here in a moment. But of the means the portion of those 2/5 that arrived on time is 7/8. So like male on time equals the 2/5 that are males times, so of those means multiply, of those 7/8 were on time, and then you just have to know how to do the fractions. Multiply fractions, 2 times 7 is 14, 14 over 8 times 5 is 40, which reduces to 7/20. Okay, so 7/20 of the total males were on time. What does that mean about females? It says, well, it tells us the female attendees of the female attendees, so the females that were on time was 9/10. So again, of the 3/5, and I had to know to do that, 9/10 of them were on time. And again, we just have to know how to do the math. 3 times 9 is 27, 5 times 10 is 50, and that doesn't really reduce. So there you go. Okay, so that's how many of each, the male and females, were on time. But it's asking what fraction of the attendees did not arrive on time. What do we do with that? Well, it's the opposite. Like if 7/20 arrived on time, that means 13/20 were not on time. Another way to do this, the way I would probably approach it, is I would just figure out the total on time. And by the way, this is what AI said to do. I forgot. I'm not telling you my way of doing it. This is what AI says. They said, okay, total on time then is the 7/20 plus the 27/50. What does that equal? Okay, well, without a calculator, again, on each of these tests at the current moment that I'm recording this, you don't have access to a calculator, but hopefully you can find common denominators. I teach a method called the magic X, but regardless, we can set this equal to a common denominator of 100. So 20 times 5 is 100, so 7 times 5 is 35, plus 50 times 2 is 100, so 27 times 2 is 54. So that equals 35 plus 54 is 89/100. So that's the total that did arrive on time. So not on time is 1 minus that, or 100% minus that, minus 89 over 100, which is just 100 over 100 equals 11 over 100. So that's answer choice A, the correct answer to the question. So well done if you got that, by the way. Hopefully you didn't get stuck on the math. If you did, post comments below. Happy to weigh in and help you. This is what AI said to do. And it's not overly challenging. It's not overly difficult, but it's a very traditional, straightforward way of answering the question. Now, let me show you my approach to this question and why I think it might set you up for more success elsewhere on the exam. So when I look at this question, and the way I teach my students how to do it is with what I call a probability tree. And there's a tip-off for that, and it's the words of the, right? When I teach my students, I'm always giving them little triggers, how to know what bucket of question they're dealing with, how to proceed, like what's the next step, or in a lot of cases, what's the first step. And the second you see these of the wording, where you have a subgroup, immediately think probability tree. And you would literally want to draw it on your scratch paper. There's a major group, and then there's a subset of the major group. And so you want to draw a probability tree like this. And it says at a monthly meeting, 2/5 of the attendees, so of the attendees, of the total attendees were male, which means the rest were female. Now stop right there. We worked the question in the abstract. We never did figure out the total attendees or anything like that. We just figured out a fraction. But here's what I would encourage you to do. I'm going to replace the T total. We're going to take this out of the world of the abstract algebra, and let's work with a real number, because since we're dealing with fractions, it doesn't matter what number we start with, the relative proportions, the relative fractions will always be the same. And what I teach my students is a good number to make up is a common denominator of all the fractions in the questions. So 10 times 8 is 80, times 5 is 400. So let's just pretend there are 400 attendees. Maybe there are, maybe there aren't, doesn't matter, because all of these fractions are going to work well with 400. And now what we can do is take it out of the world of the abstract and work with real numbers. So when it tells us 2/5 of the attendees were male, we don't have to be in the abstract. We can actually figure out what that is. How do you figure out that? Well, you can do the math, 400 times 2/5, or here's what I always kind of teach as a shortcut. 2/5 you should know is 40%. That's just one to sort of have memorized. I always teach tip your waitress, right? It's easy to figure out 10% of something. So if your bill were $400 at a restaurant, for example, 10% of that would be 40, but it's 40%, not 10%. So 4 times 40 is 160, like a $160 tip if you were tipping 40%. But what that means is you have 160 actual male attendees. So however you get there, if you multiply the fractions or just sort of use that little shortcut, now we're working with real numbers. We have 160 actual male attendees, which means we know the female, it's just the balance of the 400. So that would be 240. And then it says of the, so I'm going to change pen color here. And it says of those 100, so 160 were males and 7/8 of those males arrived on time. So here's the next branch, on time or late. Next branch down lower, on time, late. And let's just do what it tells us to do. So the on time branch is 7/8 of the males, but that's of an actual 160, right? So you could do 160 times 7/8. And that's easier than it looks because 8 goes into 16 twice. So 20 times 7, 2 times 7 is 14, plus a 0 is 140. So 140 actual male attendees arrived on time. And then I always say fill out as much of the rest of the probability tree as you can. Out of the 160, 140, that means only 20 of them left were late. And then we could do the same thing on the other branch. On the female branch, it says 9/10 of those of the female. So on the female branch arrived on time. So what's that? That's 240 times 9/10. An easy way to do this one is actually to say, okay, remember tip your waitress, 10% of that would be 24. So 24, that's actually all that's less than 240. In other words, 9/10 of 240 is only like 1/10 or 10% less than 240. So I would just do 240 minus 24, puts us at 216. And then the remaining 24 fills out the rest of that branch. So see how that works? It's sort of the same thing that AI wanted us to do using traditional straightforward math, but we've broken it out to real numbers, and now we can see with our eyes actual numbers to answer the question, which is what fraction of the attendees, so of the total 400, of the, puts that at the denominator, did not arrive on time, late. Well, that's those 20 plus those 24. That's the late category. 20 plus 24 is 44, which reduces to 11 over 100, answer choice A. So we get the same place in a slightly different way. I don't know which of these you personally view as easier. You may never have seen something like a probability tree before. Hopefully you like it. Maybe you see it as easier. Certainly a little bit more efficient, perhaps, once you get good at it. It does two things. One, it gives you a starting point. Anytime you see a question that has the words of the, it sort of gives you, hey, this is one of those subset questions. Let me think about probability trees. But here's the other reason I like it, is that what about the rest of the exam? Just because AI taught you how to do this specific question and you get your mind around the fractions and okay, I think I understand it. Hopefully you can do another question the right way if you saw something like it again. But I like tools that set you up for success on any variation of this question and other types of questions that you could see elsewhere on the exam. For example, what if you see a data sufficiency question? But wait a second, Brett, like, is this the same thing? AI didn't teach me how to do this question. Yeah, but I just did, right? It's a probability tree question in data sufficiency format. So you want to be able to connect that. You want to have tools that apply multiple different ways. In a certain group of 50 people, how many are doctors who have a law degree? How do you know this is a probability tree question? It doesn't quite say of the, but that's what it's telling you, right? Of the doctors, some have a law degree. And then you look at the statements in the group, like of the group, 36 are doctors, and then some have a law degree. It's telling you it's a probability tree question. You get familiar with it. And here's what you want to do. AI didn't teach you how to do the math, but the beauty of data sufficiency is you don't actually have to do the math. You just have to know whether or not you could find an answer. That's what data sufficiency is. And you want to be set up for success on any type of question the test makers throw at you. So you would say, oh, this is probability tree, right? I've got a certain group. Now, in this case, they told me the total group is 50 people. Some are doctors, MDs, some are not doctors, other. And then what's the subset? Some are lawyers, have a law degree, and some don't have a law degree, so no law. And then the other branch is they're not doctors, but maybe some of the non-doctors do have a law degree. And then some are don't have a law degree, so not doctors and not lawyers. And the question is, how many are doctors, this branch, who have a law degree, this branch? So this is the question. This is like our X. Can we find X? Can we find that branch? And if we draw it out, then we just have to look and see, do the statements give us the necessary information? And one of the things I always teach my students is always pre-think that before looking at the statements. To get out to this branch, what information do I need? I need to know the split that are doctors. That's like the first thing I need. Of those 50, how many are even doctors? And I have to know the next split. If I don't, I can't get out to the final branch. Make sense? I understood that intuitively when I did it on a problem solving question like we just did, but I apply the same knowledge here and the probability tree helps me visually see what part of the branch I need to get to and what information I need to get to that branch. And statement number 1 says, of the group, in the group, of those 50 people, in other words, 36 are doctors. So here's what statement 1 tells us. It tells us that there are 36 here, which means there are 14 other. Does that help me get out to here? No, because it doesn't give me the second thing I know. I don't know anything about the split of those 36. Maybe literally all 36 are doctors and there are no lawyers, or maybe it's half and half, or maybe it's no lawyers and all 36 are non-lawyers. Like, I don't know. I've got no information about that second split, so I can't answer the question. So A is out and D is out. Now I look at statement number 2. In the group, 18 have a law degree. Okay, so first of all, we have to delete any reference to the 36 people because we don't know that information when we're evaluating statement 2 in isolation. It does, however, say that 18 people have a law degree. So I like to think about this top one as like A, B, C, D. So statement number 2 tells us that A, law, plus C, like the other lawyers, is 18. Doesn't help me at all, like, because I don't know the first split. I don't know the split between those 18 between A and C. I don't know. I don't know anything according to statement number two. So B is out. But even taken together, I just don't have enough information. I don't have anything about this first split. Well, this time it does say 36. If I account for statement number one, it says that's 36, which means this 14. But again, of these 18, I don't know, like maybe all 14 of these are also lawyers, which would tell me how many doctor lawyers there are, but I don't know that split. I don't know the breakdown of those 18. So just not enough information. Answer choice E. So here's my point with this. It wasn't to teach you data sufficiency. Hopefully you understand what I just did here. If not, type your questions in the notes below or in the comment area below. The bigger picture I want you to understand is I want you preparing for your standardized test in a way where you're learning tools. I call it like tools in a tool belt that set you up to be applied in lots of different ways to solve questions more efficiently in some cases than AI would teach you the traditional way, the non-standard strategies and so forth for problem solving, but also to say, hey, I can apply this probability tree to problem solving. I can do it for data sufficiency. Maybe if it appears on integrated reasoning or data insights, I can apply the same understanding. And for the most part, AI isn't teaching you how to do that. It's just giving you a very textbook, straightforward answer to the specific question that you queried. Make sense? So that's potential threat number two. And threat number three is that AI just generally lacks a depth of understanding about the exam and may miss some key insights. It's obviously very good at pulling from a wide range of blogs and websites and who knows where else it's pulling its information. But as we already talked about, it might miss some things, including entire categories that aren't even tested on the exam. But it's not a consultant. It's a computer. So look at this question that I posed to AI. I just hypothetically said, hey, look, I've been studying for a while. I've been studying for the EA for 2 months, at least 10 hours a week. My last two practice test results were 153 and a 149. Do you think I'm ready for the real thing? Seems like a question that somebody should have some insight as to how to proceed. Like, are you ready to take the real thing or not? The question is, does AI get it right? And here's what AI said. They said, probably not. If your goal is to feel confidently ready. What's wrong with that answer? Now, here's the first thing. I was actually really surprised that it gave an answer. Usually it's either a little bit wishy-washy or I actually expected it to try to make you feel good. Like, oh, congratulations. That's what it does, right? Congratulations. You've worked really hard. That's 153. That's a pretty good score. You know, like almost patting you on the back like AI tends to do. This says, nope, you're not ready. Really? How does it know? And what does it say next? If your goal is to feel confidently ready, did it ask your goal? Like for me, I'm putting on my consultant hat. If you came to me with that question, I'm asking you a lot of questions in response. What's your goal? Now it does get that right. What does it say next? Hey, a 149, 153, you've built some foundation. Whether you're ready depends on your target score. Agree with that completely. I always say that a good score is any score that gets you into the school you want to get into. Might be a 150. Okay, well, you had one practice test at 149. Does that mean you're not ready? But you also got a 153. So maybe you are ready if your goal is only a 150. Why is it saying your goal or is your goal or thinking that your goal is to feel confidently ready? What if you feel incredibly confident? I am ready. I was really surprised by that 149. Like if you and I are having a conversation, I'm gauging that. What was your confidence level? And then I'm asking you a million questions. A million questions. Number one, what type of practice tests were they? Were they official ones or were they third-party ones? That matters. How did you treat those practice tests? Did you pause it halfway through? Were you distracted? Was your dog barking? Did you not get enough sleep? I work with students all the time and they're constantly debriefing their practice tests with me, and you would be shocked at some of the things that happen during their practice tests. And oftentimes they don't treat the practice test like the real thing, or they're basing the results on some random practice assessments from some forum or blog or whatever, but you get what I'm saying. So it's like lots of questions here. You did feel confident. Okay, where did things go wrong? Hey, target score. So it does a pretty good job of that. If your target score is 150, here's what you might be thinking. If it's a 155 plus, here's what you might be thinking. If it's a 160 plus, here's what you might be thinking. It's not giving you nuances about a 160 plus. Every one of my students who comes to me saying, I want to get a 160 on the EA, we're having a conversation around that because they don't really understand what schools are looking for, what percentile that is, what it's going to take to get a 160 and so forth. And so, yeah, there's just a lot more to this. And just understand that AI can be incredibly helpful at some things, but for actual personalized study plans and interpreting results and figuring out where you are and why your scores what they were and helping you get unstuck, like at the end of the day, it's still just a computer. So hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you learned something. We got into the weeds a little bit, and at the very least, hopefully you have some new tools now to be able to answer certain questions on your exam, understanding probability trees for both problem solving and data sufficiency. But at a higher level, I really just want you to understand that yes, you absolutely have some incredible tailwinds right now as you're preparing for your standardized test. The ability to tap into some resources that can help you build a solid foundation of maybe some of the core math concepts that you had simply forgotten. But do not forget that your goal is to get right answers on test day, not to make your high school algebra teacher happy, not to always do things the traditional way, because as I remind my students all the time, these are logical reasoning tests. They are reasoning exams. On the executive assessment and the GRE and the GMAT, they literally call the sections the quantitative reasoning section, the verbal reasoning section, the integrated reasoning section, and so forth. There are some questions that you can't plug into AI, that you can't just create a formula and get right. And so you want to approach these exams with that mindset. How do I set myself up for maximum success to get right answers in the most effective and efficient way possible? And it's not always the way that AI would lead you to believe. And I'll leave you with this final bit of encouragement from James Wright from Canada, one of my former students, who said, it had been a long time since I had seen a lot of the content tested on the EA, especially on the math side. But with Dominate Test Prep and our course, he was able to not just hit his goal of 155, he actually scored a 161, which got him into his target EMBA program. He said, Brett's fantastic prep materials helped and were worth every penny and hour that he put into it. So James, congratulations to you. Thank you for your 10 stars out of 5. I'll look for those somewhere. So with that, we'll wrap up this video. You have a lot of resources at your disposal these days, including yours truly and Dominate Test Prep. I'd love to work with you. Head over to dominatetestprep.com to check out all of our online course offerings, our tutoring services. I'm here with you every step of the way. Would love to work with you. I'm also here in the comments area below, so don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, I wish you all the best as you prepare for your standardized test on exam day and beyond. Take care, Godspeed, and we'll talk again soon.